What would you do if one ordinary day you walked into your own home and discovered your husband wasn't alone, but with the one person you trusted more than anyone else? She thought her life was perfect, her marriage was real, and her best friend was family. But in a single moment, everything turned into a lie. The question is, how long had this been going on? And what if I told you this wasn't even the worst part? Stay till the end, because this African tale of love, betrayal, and hidden truth will leave you questioning everything you think you know about trust. And if you're into real, emotional, jaw-dropping stories like this, make sure to like this video and subscribe, because the truth you're about to hear only gets darker. She lived in a quiet sense of peace that made her believe her life was finally complete. Every morning felt soft and familiar, like nothing in her world could ever break. Her husband was the kind of man she trusted without question, and her home felt stable in a way that gave her comfort. Her best friend was always close, someone who laughed with her, shared meals with her, and made life feel lighter. Everything around her seemed balanced, almost perfect, as if the world had decided to treat her gently for once and she never questioned it deeply yet. Still beneath that calm surface, small things began to exist quietly. Her husband sometimes returned home quieter than before, avoiding eye contact during simple conversations. She noticed it but told herself it was just stress and nothing serious. Her best friend also started acting slightly different, laughing less freely than before. Still, she chose to believe everything was normal and continued her routine without doubt. But deep inside, something subtle was beginning to shift in ways she could not explain yet. It was not fear yet, only a quiet feeling she kept ignoring every single day without knowing why. That morning began like any other, with soft sunlight slipping through the curtains and filling the room with warmth. She moved around the kitchen preparing breakfast, trying to keep everything normal even though her thoughts felt slightly heavy. From bedroom she heard husband getting ready, routine sounds, drawers opening, footsteps, calm familiar life. Everything looked perfect from the outside, but she could not shake the strange feeling building inside her chest. Still, she smiled softly, refusing to let her mind create problems where none should exist yet. She wanted peace more than answers in that quiet morning, for now only. But even in that calm routine, small disruptions were beginning to appear more clearly. Her husband checked his phone more often than usual, his expression unreadable and distant. Her best friend took longer to reply to messages, sometimes leaving conversations unfinished. She noticed these things but immediately pushed the thoughts away, telling herself it meant nothing. Still, the feeling inside her grew slightly heavier, like something was waiting just beneath the surface. And yet she continued her day as if everything was still exactly the same as before, but it wasn't, not in the way she believed anymore at all. By the time she finished setting the table, the house already felt quieter than usual in a way she could not explain. Her husband walked past her without saying much, lost in thoughts she could not reach. Her best friend had not replied since morning, which was unusual but still not alarming enough. She stood there for a moment, feeling a strange silence grow inside the house around her. And in that silence, she had no idea that today would change everything she believed in, because something was already waiting behind the normal life she trusted completely without warning yet. She began to notice small changes in her life that did not feel important at first, but slowly started to stay in her thoughts longer than they should. Her husband was leaving the house earlier than usual. Not suddenly, not in a suspicious way, just quietly earlier than the routine she had always known. Sometimes she would still be half awake when she felt him moving around, getting ready without the usual conversation or warmth that once filled the mornings. When she asked him about it, he would simply say work was demanding more of his time. His answer was normal, but the feeling behind it was not as familiar as before. Her best friend was also becoming different in ways she could not easily explain. Messages that used to come instantly now had gaps in them. Calls were sometimes missed or returned later with short replies. When they did talk, the laughter that once came naturally felt slightly controlled, as if something was being held back. It was not obvious enough to accuse anyone, but it was enough to make her pause longer than she used to. At first, she tried to ignore everything. She told herself that this is how life becomes when people get busy. She reminded herself that relationships sometimes shift in small ways without meaning anything serious. But even as she thought that, a quiet discomfort kept growing inside her. It was not fear yet, not suspicion in its full form, just a slow emotional confusion that had no clear shape. One morning, her husband left earlier again. She noticed it this time more clearly. She stood near the kitchen counter watching him adjust his clothes and walk out without turning back. That moment felt small, almost meaningless, but it stayed with her longer than expected. It was not what he did, but what he did not do. The absence of his usual glance felt heavier than anything she could explain. Later that day, she tried reaching her best friend again. The phone rang longer than usual before it was answered. The voice on the other side sounded slightly distracted, as if she was somewhere else mentally. The conversation ended quickly, with simple words that did not fully feel complete. After the call, she sat in silence for a moment, staring at her phone without knowing why her chest felt tighter. By evening, the house felt different. Nothing had changed physically, but the silence felt more noticeable than before. Even normal sounds seemed sharper, and pauses between actions felt longer. She moved through her routine, but her mind was not fully inside it anymore. There was a feeling growing inside her that she kept trying to push away, but it kept returning quietly. That night, she made a decision she did not fully understand herself. She would go home unexpectedly the next day. Not because she had proof of anything wrong, but because ignoring the feeling no longer felt possible. It was not certainty that guided her, it was the absence of it. And somewhere deep inside that quiet decision, a door was already beginning to open towards something she had never imagined she would have to face. She reached the house earlier than anyone expected her to. The streets behind her felt unusually quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Every step she took toward the door felt heavier than the last, not because she knew what she would find, but because she could not stop the feeling that something inside was already wrong. She paused for a moment, hand hovering near the handle, listening. That's when she heard it. A faint sound from inside. Not loud, not clear, but enough to make her body go still. Her heart reacted before her mind did. A sudden quickening, like a warning she could not ignore anymore. She stayed frozen, trying to convince herself it could be anything ordinary. Maybe a visitor. Maybe a misunderstanding. Maybe nothing at all. But the sound came again, softer this time, and it pulled her forward without permission. She slowly pushed the door open. The house felt different the moment she stepped inside. Not physically different, but emotionally. Like the air itself had changed its meaning. Her footsteps were slow, careful, almost silent as she moved deeper inside, following the direction of the sound she could no longer deny. Every second stretched longer than normal, every breath felt louder in her own ears. And then she saw them. For a moment, her mind refused to accept what her eyes were showing her. Her husband was there. And her best friend was there too. Together. Too close. Too familiar. Too wrong. The scene did not explode into chaos. There was no shouting, no sudden movement. Everything stayed strangely still, as if even time had stopped to witness it. But inside her, something broke without making a sound. Her body did not move. Her voice did not come out. It was as if someone had pressed pause on her entire existence. She tried to understand what she was seeing, but her mind kept rejecting it before it could become real. This cannot be happening. This does not make sense. There has to be another explanation. Each thought collided with the next, none of them strong enough to become truth. Her eyes stayed fixed, but her mind began to blur. The faces in front of her felt distant, like they belonged to someone else's life. She could hear her own heartbeat louder now, filling the silence between them. It was the only thing that felt real. And yet no one spoke. That silence hurt more than words ever could. It stretched endlessly, pulling her deeper into confusion, into disbelief, into something she did not yet understand. She wanted to step back, to leave, to wake up from whatever this was. But her body did not respond. Inside her chest, something collapsed quietly, not all at once, but piece by piece, as she kept looking at them, trying to find the version of reality that made sense again. But there wasn't one. And in that suspended moment of silence, the only question that remained was not what she saw, but what she would do next. The silence broke slowly, not with a sudden explosion, but with a shaky breath that felt like it carried too much weight. Her voice came out before she even fully understood she was speaking. It was not strong, not controlled, just broken words trying to form meaning in a moment that refused to make sense. "What is this?" The sentence didn't feel complete even as she said it. Her eyes moved between them, searching for something, anything, that could turn what she was seeing into a misunderstanding. Her husband stepped slightly forward, his expression changing quickly, like he had been caught between truth and explanation. He opened his mouth, but the words didn't come immediately. That delay alone made everything heavier. "It's not what you think," he finally said, but his voice lacked the certainty she needed to believe it. Her best friend reacted differently. A quick movement, a sharp breath, and then a defensive tone that tried to sound calm but carried tension underneath it. "You're misunderstanding everything," she said, but her eyes didn't stay steady. They shifted away for a second too long. That small detail hit harder than anything else. The wife felt her thoughts collapsing into chaos. One part of her wanted to scream, another part refused to accept what was happening, and another part simply froze, unable to process anything at all. She tried to speak again, but the words came out broken, incomplete. "How long?" she started, then stopped. Her voice cracked in the middle, unable to continue. She tried again, but nothing formed properly. Her husband took a step closer, as if trying to fix the situation by being near her. "Please listen," he said quickly, "this is complicated." Complicated. The word felt wrong. Too small for what she was feeling. Too weak to explain the collapse happening inside her. Her best friend shook her head slightly, like she was trying to deny something without saying it directly. "It's not what it looks like," she repeated, but even she didn't sound fully convinced by her own words. And that was the moment everything turned unclear. There was no truth arriving. No explanation that made sense. Only fragments of sentences, broken tones, and emotions that didn't match each other. The room felt smaller, tighter, like the air itself was becoming harder to breathe in. Her hands started trembling slightly. She looked at both of them once more, trying to find something real in their faces. But everything felt distorted now. Like trust had been erased and replaced with noise she could not decode. Without another word, she stepped back. No shouting. No final question. No dramatic collapse. Just distance. She turned away from them slowly, her steps uncertain but moving forward anyway. Behind her, she could hear someone calling her name, but it sounded far away, like it belonged to another life. She didn't stop. She didn't answer. And she didn't look back. Because in that moment, staying would have meant accepting a truth she was not ready to face. And as she walked out of that house, one question stayed behind in the silence louder than everything else. What is the real story behind this betrayal? After she left, the silence she carried was not empty, it was heavy, like something solid sitting inside her chest. The world outside the house continued normally, but nothing inside her felt normal anymore. Every step she took away from that place felt like she was leaving behind a version of herself she could never return to. Her phone started to light up again and again. First, it was her husband. One call. Then another. Then messages, one after the other, each one shorter but more desperate than the last. "Please pick up. We need to talk. You're misunderstanding everything." His words kept repeating in different forms, as if repetition could fix something that had already broken. But she didn't answer. Not because she didn't see them, but because she didn't know what answering would lead to. Then came her best friend. At first, there was nothing. No calls. No messages. Just silence from the one person she never expected silence from. And that silence felt heavier than anything else. Because anger speaks, lies speak, excuses speak, but silence feels like disappearance. Like someone stepping out of your life without saying it directly. Hours passed like that, each one slower than the last. And then her mind began to do something dangerous. It started pulling memories forward. Small moments that once felt normal now returned with new meaning. The way her husband sometimes paused before answering simple questions. The way her best friend would occasionally go quiet when certain topics came up. The way both of them sometimes seemed to understand each other without words, something she never paid attention to before. Now those same moments felt different. Suspicious. Connected. Rewritten by doubt. She sat alone, staring at nothing, as her mind replayed everything again and again. A laugh that felt slightly too controlled. A glance that lasted half a second too long. A silence that once meant nothing but now felt like it meant everything. Her breathing became uneven without her noticing. How long has this been happening? The thought came quietly at first. Then louder. Then again and again, like her mind refused to stop asking it. The more she tried to reject the idea, the more it grew. Because betrayal does not always begin at the moment you see it. Sometimes it begins in the moments you didn't notice. Her phone lit up again, another message from her husband. This time shorter. It wasn't planned like this. That line stopped everything inside her. Not because it explained anything, but because it created more questions than it answered. If it wasn't planned, then what was it? Accidental? Emotional? Or something far more complicated than both of them were willing to admit? She slowly lowered the phone, her grip tightening without her realizing it. The world around her felt unstable now, like truth itself had stopped being solid. And in that shifting uncertainty, one question refused to leave her mind. Was this planned or accidental? She finally answered the call, but only after letting it ring long enough for her emotions to settle into something colder. Her voice did not come quickly. There was a pause first, a silence that already carried tension before any words were spoken. On the other side, her husband sounded relieved, but also careful, like he was choosing every sentence before saying it. "Please, just listen to me," he said softly. She didn't respond immediately. She just held the phone, staring at nothing, waiting. Waiting not for excuses, but for something that could make sense of what she had seen. But deep inside, she already knew nothing would fully make sense anymore. "I didn't want things to happen like this," he continued. His voice cracked slightly, not dramatically, but enough to show pressure behind it. It started as a misunderstanding. Emotional confusion. Nothing planned. That word again. Misunderstanding. It sounded too simple for something that had broken her world. Her grip tightened around the phone. Misunderstanding, she repeated slowly, as if testing the word to see if it had any truth inside it. "You think that explains everything I saw?" There was a pause on the other end. That pause said more than his explanation. He tried again, faster this time. "It's complicated. I never intended for it to go this far. I was dealing with things I couldn't explain properly. I made mistakes." Mistakes. She closed her eyes for a moment, not because she believed him, but because hearing him speak like that made something inside her shift between anger and something else she didn't want to name. A part of her still wanted clarity. Another part wanted nothing to do with any explanation at all. And then she thought of her best friend. Still no message. Still no call. Only silence. That silence felt louder than his words. "Did she know?" she asked suddenly, her voice sharper now, cutting through the hesitation. Or was I the only one who didn't see this coming? Another pause. Longer this time. And in that pause, doubt grew in ways she didn't expect. Because silence is never neutral, it always leans towards something. I'm not trying to hide anything from you, he finally said. But his tone didn't fully match his words. It sounded controlled. Measured. Like he was holding parts of the truth back just out of reach. And that is what made everything worse. Because now she couldn't tell what was real anymore. Anger rose inside her again, sharp and immediate, but underneath it, something else lingered. A pull she didn't want to admit. Memories of who he used to be. Moments that felt real. A life that didn't feel like a lie until now. She hated that part of herself the most. I don't believe you, she said quietly. The words were simple, but they landed heavily. On the other end, he didn't argue. He didn't defend himself fully. Instead, he said something softer, almost broken. There's more, but I don't know how to explain it yet. That sentence changed everything again. More. Not explanation. Not clarity. Just more. And before she could ask what he meant, the call went quiet for a moment, like even the conversation itself was hesitating. Because now, one question refused to leave her mind, louder than everything else he had said. What is he not telling her? The more she tried to understand the situation, the more it felt like the ground beneath her memories was shifting. Nothing was stable anymore. Even the past, which once felt simple and safe, now seemed uncertain, as if it might be hiding details she was never meant to notice. She stayed away from both of them for a while, not because she had made peace, but because she needed space from everything that was collapsing inside her. But silence did not give her answers. Instead, it gave her time to think. And thinking made things worse. One evening, she received a message from someone she didn't expect. It was an old contact, someone she hadn't spoken to in a long time. The message was simple at first, casual, asking how she was doing. But then came something that made her pause completely. I thought you knew they had a history before you came into the picture. She read it once. Then again. Slowly. Carefully. As if reading it differently might change its meaning. Her fingers went cold. A history. Before her. She stared at the screen for a long time without responding. The world around her felt distant, like sound itself had been lowered. Everything she thought she understood about her life suddenly felt incomplete. Her mind immediately went back to moments she had once ignored. The first time she had introduced her husband to her best friend. The slight hesitation in their expressions. The brief silence that followed before they acted normal again. At the time, it had meant nothing. Now it felt like something she had missed completely. Her chest tightened slowly as realization didn't come all at once, but in pieces. If they had known each other before her, then what was her role in all of this? Was she part of something that already existed before she entered it? The thought felt uncomfortable, almost unreal. She tried to reject it, but it kept returning in different forms, forcing itself into her understanding of the past. Every memory started to feel unreliable. Every smile between them, every shared moment, every silence, everything now carried a second meaning she had never seen before. Her trust didn't just break. It changed shape. It felt like she had been standing in a story that didn't start with her, even though she believed it did. And that was the most painful realization of all. Because betrayal is not always about what happens in the present. Sometimes it is about discovering you were never the center of the story you believed you were part of. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breathing, but her mind refused to stop. One question kept echoing louder than anything else she had heard so far. If they had a past, then where exactly did she fit into it? And slowly, unwillingly, another thought formed beneath it, one she didn't want to accept but couldn't ignore anymore. Was she the third person all along? She didn't expect a message from her best friend. After everything went silent between them, she had almost convinced herself that no explanation would ever come. But one evening, the notification appeared, and everything she had been holding inside her suddenly tightened again. "I think you deserve to hear my side," the message said. For a long time, she didn't reply. She just stared at the screen, feeling a mix of anger and exhaustion building together in a way that made it hard to think clearly. Part of her wanted to ignore it completely. Another part, the part still searching for understanding, made her open it. The voice note came first. Her best friend sounded different. Not confident like before. Not defensive like in the past. There was hesitation in her tone, as if she was speaking while carrying something heavy she had been holding for too long. "It wasn't planned," she said quietly. "Nothing about this was supposed to happen like this." That phrase again. Not planned. Her grip tightened slightly as she listened. "I never intended to hurt you," the voice continued. "But things between me and him, they go back further than you know. We tried to ignore it. We tried to move on. But sometimes emotions don't just disappear because you decide they should." She stopped there for a moment, like she was struggling to find the right way to continue. And then she added something that made everything more complicated. "There were times I felt like I was doing the right thing, and still ending up in the wrong place." The message ended there. Silence followed. Not relief. Not clarity. Just more confusion. She replayed it again, hoping she had misunderstood something. But every word stayed the same. Every pause stayed the same. And the contradictions inside it started to form slowly in her mind. If it wasn't intentional, then why did it feel so structured? If it was emotional confusion, then why did it involve secrecy? Her anger began to rise again, not loudly, but steadily. Because now it wasn't just betrayal she was dealing with. It was uncertainty. The kind that makes you question not only others, but your own ability to understand what is real. She thought back to her husband's words. His explanations. His pauses. His unfinished sentences. And now this. Two versions of the same story. Both incomplete. Both emotional. Both claiming innocence in their own way. But neither fully matching the other. And that was the most unsettling part. Because when stories don't align, truth doesn't become clearer, it becomes more distant. She stood up from where she was sitting, walking slowly through the room, trying to process everything without breaking down into chaos. But instead of answers, more questions started forming. Why did their stories feel connected but not consistent? Why did both of them sound like they were telling half-truths instead of lies? And why did she feel like the real explanation was still hidden somewhere deeper, untouched by both of them? Her breathing slowed, but her thoughts didn't. Because now she couldn't trust certainty anymore. Not theirs. Not her own. And the only question left echoing in her mind was the one she couldn't escape anymore. Who is lying, and who is telling the truth? After that message, everything inside her life stopped feeling stable. It was not just the situation anymore, it was her mind turning against itself. She found herself sitting alone more often, avoiding conversations, avoiding noise, avoiding anything that could pull her back into a reality she no longer trusted. The house felt bigger than before, but emptier in a way that pressed down on her thoughts. Even simple sounds, the ticking clock, distant footsteps, the wind outside, felt louder than they should have. Silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy. It gave her too much space to think. And thinking was the problem. Because every time she tried to understand what had happened, she ended up in the same place, confusion. No clear beginning, no clear ending, just pieces of moments that refused to form a complete picture. She kept replaying conversations in her head. Her husband's words. Her best friend's voice. The pauses. The contradictions. Everything repeated again and again until it lost meaning. She started questioning things she never thought she would question. Was she too trusting? Did she miss signs that were always there? Or had she simply built a version of life that never existed the way she believed it did? That thought hurt the most. Because it didn't just question them. It questioned her. One evening, she sat near the window, staring outside without really seeing anything. Her phone lay beside her, silent for hours. No new messages. No explanations. Just distance from both sides. And in that distance, her mind began to turn inward. She remembered small moments again, but now they felt heavier. A smile she once trusted. A conversation she thought was innocent. A silence she ignored because it felt harmless at the time. Now everything looked different under the weight of what she knew. Or what she thought she knew. Was I blind? The thought came quietly at first. Then again. And again. Not as a question anymore, but as a doubt that refused to leave. Her chest tightened as she tried to push the thought away, but it didn't go. Instead, it spread. Slowly changing how she saw everything. Even her own memories started feeling unreliable, as if they belonged to someone else's story. She stood up and walked through the house without purpose, touching things she didn't need to touch, stopping in places she didn't need to stop. It felt like she was trying to stay connected to something real, but nothing felt stable anymore. There was no anger left in that moment. Not yet. Only heaviness. The kind that comes when answers stop coming and the mind starts filling the silence with its own versions of truth. And the worst part was the loneliness inside it. Because no matter how many explanations she had heard, no matter how many contradictions she had faced, she still felt completely alone in what this had become. Not because no one was there. But because no one made sense anymore. She stopped walking and stood still in the middle of the room, her thoughts slowing but not stopping. Everything inside her felt like it was collapsing quietly, without noise, without witness. And in that silence, one question stayed alive inside her, refusing to disappear. What will she do next? Something began to change inside her after days of silence and overthinking. It wasn't sudden. It didn't come like a decision or a moment of clarity. It came slowly, almost quietly, like a small shift in how she started seeing the same pieces of information she had already seen before, but this time differently. She stopped crying. Not because the pain was gone, but because her emotions were starting to settle into something sharper. Something more focused. She began replaying everything again, but this time she didn't just feel it, she analyzed it. Every conversation, every contradiction, every pause that once felt confusing now started to form patterns she had missed before. Her husband's explanations were always emotional, but never complete. He spoke in fragments, always stopping just before details. Always redirecting before clarity arrived. Her best friend's messages were the same. Emotional, but inconsistent. Apologies without context. Explanations without structure. Feelings without grounding. At first, she thought it was just confusion from both sides. But now she started noticing something else. They were not confused in the same way. They were avoiding different parts of the truth. That thought made her sit still for a long time. For the first time, she didn't feel lost inside the situation. She felt positioned outside of it. Like she was finally looking at it instead of drowning inside it. She picked up her phone and went through old messages again. This time carefully. Slowly. Not emotionally, but observantly. And that's when she saw it. Small inconsistencies. A message time that didn't match a conversation she remembered. A statement that contradicted something said earlier. A memory she had trusted suddenly didn't align with the timeline she was now rebuilding in her mind. Nothing was huge on its own. But together, they didn't fit. Her breathing slowed as awareness replaced confusion. It was not about what they were saying anymore. It was about what they were avoiding saying. And more importantly, what they both seemed to know without directly admitting. She stood up, walking slowly through the room again, but this time her movements were different. More controlled. More intentional. The same house, the same silence, but her mind was no longer sinking inside it. It was observing it. For the first time, she wasn't reacting. She was thinking ahead. And that shift changed everything. Because when you stop being emotionally lost, you start noticing things people assume you will never see. She stopped at the table, placing her phone down carefully, her eyes fixed on nothing but her thoughts connecting faster now. The fear that once controlled her was slowly being replaced by something else. Understanding. Not full understanding. But enough to question everything again, but this time with direction. And in that growing clarity, one thought became stronger than all the others. There was still something missing. Something neither of them had said. Something hidden beneath all the emotional explanations, all the contradictions, all the silence. And she finally asked herself the question she had been avoiding until now. What truth is she about to uncover? This time, she did not act emotionally. She did not rush. She did not break down. Something inside her had changed after days of silence and observation. The confusion was still there, but now it was controlled. Focused. She no longer wanted comfort or explanations that sounded soft. She wanted consistency. She wanted truth that could survive comparison. So she made a decision. She would speak to both of them. Separately. Not together. Not in the same space where emotions could overlap and blur everything again. This time, she wanted distance between their words. She wanted to see what remained when they could not adjust their answers to each other in real time. The first meeting was with her husband. He arrived carefully, like someone walking into a situation they already feared. His expression was controlled, but his eyes carried pressure. He started speaking before she even asked anything. As if he had been preparing for this moment for a long time. But his version was still incomplete. He spoke about emotions. Confusion. Pressure. Moments of weakness. He tried to explain it as something that grew slowly, something he didn't fully understand himself at the beginning. He avoided direct points, circling around details instead of landing on them. And every time she asked a direct question, he answered slightly sideways. Not lying fully. Not revealing fully either. Just staying in between. She watched him carefully this time. Not emotionally, but mentally mapping every inconsistency. And she noticed something important. His truth always changed shape depending on the question she asked. Then she met her best friend. The difference was immediate. Her best friend didn't speak with the same structure. Her version was emotional, fragmented, filled with pauses that felt like hesitation mixed with guilt. She spoke more about feelings than events. More about confusion than choices. But something was still off. Because even though both of them were emotional, they were emotional in different directions. They weren't sharing the same truth. They were protecting different versions of it. That realization didn't shock her anymore. It sharpened her focus instead. She sat back after both conversations, replaying everything in her mind. 2 stories. 2 emotional explanations. 2 different patterns of memory. And yet both were trying to explain the same situation. But they didn't connect. Not properly. Not cleanly. Not truthfully. That's when she understood something deeper. This was not just about betrayal. It was about structure. Something had existed before her involvement that neither of them fully wanted to expose. And now every explanation she had heard was shaped around protecting that hidden structure instead of revealing it. She looked down at her hands for a moment, feeling a strange calm forming inside her. Not peace. Not acceptance. Something sharper. Awareness. Because now the question had changed completely. It was no longer about what happened between them. It was about what existed before her arrival that made all of this possible in the first place. And in that realization, one question rose above everything else, clearer than ever before. What is the real story behind both lies? The second conversation didn't feel like discovery anymore. It felt like collapse. Because this time, when she listened carefully, really carefully, she stopped hearing emotions and started hearing structure underneath them. Patterns. Gaps. Carefully avoided details that both of them, in different ways, refused to fully touch. And slowly, something unbearable started forming. Not a single moment. Not a sudden mistake. But continuity. The truth wasn't something that happened recently. It had been building for longer than she ever imagined. Her husband's voice echoed in her mind again, not as an explanation, but as fragments. It didn't start like this, I didn't plan it, it became complicated, words that always avoided a beginning. Always avoided responsibility for origin. And her best friend's version didn't cancel it out, it completed it in the worst way. Because she didn't deny the connection. She described it differently. Emotionally. Gradually. Like something that never had a clear start, only slow emotional drift. Moments that crossed boundaries without being labeled. Conversations that should have stopped but didn't. Silence that should have created distance but instead became familiarity. And that was when the truth stopped feeling like confusion. It started feeling like design. Not planned in a single moment, but allowed. Repeated. Protected. Hidden inside emotional excuses. Her hands went cold as she realized what neither of them had ever directly said. This was not a mistake that happened once. It was something that continued while she was still inside the picture, believing everything was normal. And that was the real betrayal. Not the moment she saw them. But everything that happened before that moment that she was never meant to fully notice. Emotional manipulation didn't always look aggressive. Sometimes it looked gentle. Sometimes it looked like reassurance. Sometimes it looked like nothing is wrong said enough times that you stop questioning what you feel. And now she could see it. The way her doubts were softened in the past. The way concerns were redirected. The way explanations were always available, but never complete enough to stop uncertainty from growing quietly in the background. She sat down slowly, not because she was weak, but because her mind had finally reached the limit of how much it could process at once. Trust didn't break in a single direction. It shattered completely. Not just toward them, but toward everything she had believed without questioning. The memories that once felt safe now felt rewritten. The laughter, the familiarity, the shared presence, all of it now carried a second meaning she could not unsee. And in that unbearable clarity, she understood something final. She had not been standing in a moment of betrayal. She had been inside a situation that was already unstable long before she ever realized it. And now there was nothing left to soften the truth. Only its weight. Because once trust is shattered at this level, it doesn't just break relationships. It changes how reality itself feels. And as she sat there in silence, the only question left was no longer about what had happened, but about what she would do now that there was nothing left to protect her from the truth. She didn't sleep that night. Not because she couldn't, but because her mind refused to stop replaying everything in a loop that felt endless. The truth had already been revealed in pieces, but acceptance was something entirely different. Knowing something and feeling it are never the same thing, and now she was trapped between both. She sat alone in the quiet of her room, where nothing moved except time itself. The house felt different now, not because it had changed, but because she had changed inside it. Every corner carried memories that no longer felt simple. Even silence felt heavier, as if it was waiting for her to make a decision she had been avoiding. Her thoughts kept pulling her in two directions. One part of her mind still remembered what they were before everything broke. The small moments that once felt real. The laughter that didn't feel forced. The comfort of believing she was safe with both of them in different ways. Love, or what she once believed was love, still existed in fragments she couldn't erase completely. But the other part of her mind refused to ignore what she now knew. The inconsistencies. The emotional manipulation. The hidden layers that stretched far beyond a simple mistake. That version of reality felt colder, but clearer. It didn't comfort her, it exposed everything she had been blind to. And that was the conflict breaking her from inside. Was she holding on to love, or just the memory of it? She stood up slowly and walked toward the window, looking outside at a world that continued normally without knowing what she was carrying inside her. People lived, laughed, moved forward. But her world felt paused, stuck between what was and what can never be again. She tried to remember the beginning of everything. Not the betrayal, but before it. Before suspicion. Before truth. Before everything collapsed. And for a moment, she almost convinced herself that maybe things could have been different if she had seen earlier, spoken earlier, questioned earlier. But that thought quickly turned into something sharper. Because even if she had known earlier, would it have changed what they chose to hide? The answer didn't come easily. And that made her realize something painful. Some endings are not caused by lack of love. They are caused by lack of honesty. Her heart still pulled toward the idea of forgiveness, not because she trusted them fully anymore, but because letting go completely meant accepting that everything she felt once had been touched by something she never understood. But forgiveness and walking away were no longer emotional choices. They were consequences. And both of them would change everything that came after this moment. She closed her eyes, taking a long breath that didn't feel fully steady. For the first time, she wasn't searching for truth anymore. She was searching for herself inside the truth she already knew. And the only question left standing between her heart and her reality was simple, but impossible to answer yet. Will she forgive, or walk away? When she finally spoke to them again, it was not the same woman who had broken down before. This time, she didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. And she didn't come searching for explanations. She came with clarity. Both of them were there, standing in front of her in the same space again, but the energy between them had changed completely. It was no longer confusion pulling her apart. It was awareness holding her together. The silence between them felt sharper than before, but she didn't break it. She let it exist, fully, without fear. Because this time, she was not there to ask what happened. She already knew enough. She was there to decide what it meant. Her husband tried to speak first, like he had done before, but she raised her hand slightly, not aggressively, just enough to stop him. Not out of anger, but control. That small gesture alone changed the direction of everything in the room. "Don't explain," she said quietly. Her voice was steady. Calm. Unshaken. That alone made him pause. She looked at both of them directly, not searching for truth anymore, but observing their reaction to hers. There was a difference now. Before, she had been reacting to them. Now, they were reacting to her. "I've heard enough explanations," she continued. "And I've listened to every version of what you think happened." Her words were not loud, but they carried weight. Neither of them interrupted her. She took a slow breath before continuing, her expression firm but controlled. "What I want now is not your truth," she said. "It's my decision." That sentence changed the air completely. Because suddenly, the conversation was no longer about defending or explaining. It was about consequence. Her best friend lowered her gaze slightly, as if something inside her had already started accepting what was coming. Her husband, on the other hand, looked like he wanted to say something, but didn't know which version of himself to use anymore. And that was when she understood something clearly. They were no longer in control of this moment. She was. Everything she had felt, betrayal, confusion, emotional collapse, had brought her here, not to break her, but to strip away everything unnecessary until only clarity remained. She stepped slightly closer, not into anger, but into resolution. "I don't need more details," she said. "I don't need more explanations. I needed truth before. Now I only need closure." Her voice didn't shake. Not once. And in that silence that followed, there was no longer room for manipulation, confusion, or incomplete stories. Only decision. She looked at them one last time, not as the woman she used to be, but as someone who had already crossed the emotional point of return. And in that final moment of control, one question hung in the air heavier than anything before it. What decision will define her future? She didn't wait for another explanation. Not because she was angry anymore, but because she had already reached the point where staying would change nothing except delay her own healing. The decision had already formed inside her long before she spoke it out loud. Now it only needed action. So she left. Not dramatically. Not in a moment of chaos. There was no shouting, no collapse, no final emotional explosion. Just a quiet turning away from everything that once defined her life. The same house, the same people, the same memories, but none of it felt like home anymore. Her footsteps were steady as she walked away, not fast, not slow. Just controlled. Every step felt like distance being created not only physically, but emotionally. The further she moved, the lighter something inside her began to feel, even though pain still existed beneath it. Behind her, she didn't need to look back to know what was happening. Her husband stood still, unable to follow immediately, as if reality itself had paused him in place. The weight of everything unsaid now finally had consequences that could not be redirected into explanations anymore. He had words before. Now he only had silence. Her best friend remained quieter than before, no longer trying to defend anything, no longer searching for the right version of truth to present. Because at that moment, there was no version left that could repair what had already been understood. And that was the beginning of consequence. Not loud consequence. Not cinematic punishment. But emotional aftermath, the kind that doesn't end quickly, the kind that stays longer than the moment that created it. She didn't feel victorious. That wasn't what this was. There was no satisfaction in loss like this. Only release. A painful kind of clarity that comes when denial is no longer possible, and pretending becomes heavier than truth. As she stepped further away, the life she once believed in began to feel like something she had outgrown without realizing it. Not because it was entirely fake, but because it was incomplete in ways she could no longer ignore. She took a deep breath as she continued walking, feeling the weight in her chest slowly shifting, not disappearing, but changing form. From confusion into acceptance. From emotional chaos into something quieter. Something final. Behind her, everything she once held on to began to settle into its consequences. Words that were never said now carried weight. Actions that were never admitted now had meaning. And silence, once used as protection, now became something irreversible. But for the first time in a long time, she was not inside it anymore. She was outside it. And even though the pain still existed, so did something else. Distance. Control. And a fragile sense of beginning again. As she moved forward into a space that no longer carried their presence, one question remained behind her like an echo she couldn't fully escape yet. Did she truly move on? Time didn't heal everything. But it changed how she carried it. Weeks had passed since she walked away, yet nothing inside her life felt like it had simply gone back to normal. It didn't. It couldn't. What had happened was not something that gets erased with time. It becomes part of you, but not in the same way it once hurt. She had changed. Not loudly. Not in a visible, dramatic transformation. But in the quiet way a person learns to breathe differently after surviving something they once thought would destroy them. There were mornings now where she woke up without immediately reaching for explanations, without replaying conversations in her head. The noise inside her mind had not disappeared completely, but it no longer controlled her the way it used to. She had learned something painful but necessary. Not everyone who smiles with you is safe with your truth. Not every closeness is loyalty. And not every silence means peace. At first, she thought healing would feel like forgetting. But instead, it felt like remembering without breaking. The same memories still existed, but they no longer had the same power over her emotions. They had lost their authority over her present. She had started rebuilding her life slowly, piece by piece. Not rushing into happiness, not forcing herself to move on, but allowing herself to exist without constantly being pulled back into the past. There were days she felt strong. There were days she felt tired. But none of them felt like falling apart anymore. And that was new. Trust, she realized, was not something you gave back easily after it breaks. It became something she learned to rebuild inside herself first. Not in others. Not in promises. But in her own judgment, her own awareness, her own ability to see clearly without ignoring warning signs. Betrayal had changed her, but not in the way it was meant to destroy her. It removed illusion. It removed blindness. It removed the version of her that believed love alone was enough to protect her from truth. Now she understood something deeper. Love without honesty is not safety. And connection without truth is not loyalty. One evening, she stood near a window again, just like before, but this time, her thoughts were not heavy. They were quiet. Controlled. Clear in a way they had never been before. She didn't feel like a victim anymore. She didn't feel like a broken story either. She felt like someone who had walked through something that could have ended her, but didn't. Because she chose to face it instead of living inside it. And in that realization, something final settled inside her, not sadness, not anger, but understanding. People don't always break because of betrayal. Sometimes they break open. And what comes after is not destruction. It is awareness. It is strength that doesn't need validation. It is a version of self that cannot be fooled the same way again. She took a slow breath, looking at the world ahead instead of behind her, and for the first time, the past did not feel like a place she was trapped in. It felt like something she had passed through. And as she stood there in her quiet strength, one truth remained, not as a question anymore, but as something she now understood completely. Truth always reveals itself, and some betrayals don't break you, they rebuild you. If this story made you feel something, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes the most powerful truths are not what we see, but what we realize after everything falls apart. And if you've ever experienced a betrayal that changed you, tell me, did it break you, or rebuild you? See you in the next story.